Today's daf is Nedarim 35, Nedarim Lamed Hey. We're going to start right at the top of Lamed Hey, Amid Aleph. Yesterday's daf, we saw that Rebbe Chiya bar Avin asked the question from Rava. If a person said to a person, if let's say Reuven said to Shimon, Kikari alecha, my loaf of bread or my piece of cake is prohibited upon you, and then he wants to give it to him as a gift. And so Reuven said to Shimon, my piece of cake is prohibited upon you. And then he says, but I want to give it to you as a gift now. It's no longer my cake. Is it going to be permitted for Shimon to accept the cake? And Rava said it's obvious that he could accept the cake there, because what else would he mean when he says this phrase, Kikari alecha? He obviously meant that he can't give it to you as a gift under those circumstances, because you can't actually lend out a piece of cake. It's not the type of thing, like it's a definition of you can't eat your cake and have it too. So Rava had said it's obvious that if you said my loaf of bread or my piece of cake is prohibited upon you, that you then can't give it to the person as a gift. But the Gemara challenges Rava from a brisa on the top of 35a, where the Gemara says, Ace of A, Amar lo, let's say Reuven says to Shimon, Hishilani parascha, he says, let me borrow your cow. And Amar lo, and then Shimon responds, Konim para shani kanoi lecha. He says basically the whole idea is he says, I'm not letting you borrow my cow, and this cow that I have is prohibited upon you. Or if he says, Nechasi alecha, he says, I don't have a cow. If I do have a cow, my cow is prohibited upon you. Because he says, he said, basically, if I have any cow other than this cow, then all my possessions are prohibited upon you. Or if he said, he said, the Reuven says, Shimon, let me borrow your axe. And I'm all, he says, no, the axe that I have is prohibited upon you. Or if he said shani kanoi, or if he says nechasi alecha yeshli kardum elazeh, he says all my possessions are prohibited upon you if I have an axe other than this. But then he discovers he has an axe. So in any event, we have a situation where Shimon's cow or axe are prohibited upon Reuven. So now what's the story? B'chayav aser. So while Shimon is alive, his axe and his cows are prohibited upon Reuven. But let's say Shimon would die, or Shimon would give it to him as a gift, then Reuven would be allowed to get benefit from him, because he says, my cow and my axe are prohibited upon you. But in this case, he's giving it to him as a gift, so it's going to be permitted. So this is a question on Rava, because Rava says if you say my piece of cake is prohibited upon you, and then he gives it to him as a gift, it's obvious that it's prohibited. But in this case, we're saying that it becomes permitted. You're allowed to do it. So isn't it a question on Rava? So the more answer is, no. When the Brisa says, Shenas no b'matana, they had a tradition to read it, Shenis no lo. Not that it was Shenas no lo, but Shenis no lo. That it was given. Shimon gave it to Reuven, but Shimon didn't give it to Reuven. Shimon gave it to Levi, and Levi gave it to Reuven. So it wasn't given directly to Reuven. That's why Reuven was allowed to get benefit. It went through a third party. So therefore, that's the reason why it was permitted. And Amar Rav Ashi, de kanami de katani shenisno lo katani shenasno. It says it can infer this from the Mishnah, because we have it written as it was given to him, but it doesn't state that he gave it to him. And so therefore, that's how Rav would answer that question. So the Gemara says, now let's ask a more fundamental question, which really we could have asked back at the beginning of our tractate. We have seen many times in our tractate that a word for a vow, a way to make a vow, is to be matfis, that you associate it with a carbon, something that's prohibited upon you. So this piece of bread is like a carbon to me. And a version of the word carbon that is often used is the word konem. So you're basically saying this konem, this piece of bread upon me. And when you're in fact saying that this piece of bread is like a carbon upon me. But the Gemara's question is going to be, how far do we push that? Are we saying that it's really like a carbon? And we know that when you take something that's dedicated to the temple and you misappropriate it for your own purposes. If you do this intentionally, then you get a penalty of kares. But if you do it accidentally, bishogeg, that's called me'ila, and you have to bring out asha me'ila, and you also have to pay back the value you took plus 1/5. So the Gemara now asks a question: is there going to be considered misappropriation of funds if you do this to to something that you've taken a vow against? A loaf of bread, you say this loaf of bread is konim upon me. Is it going to be considered like the prohibition of me'ila? So we'll read it around. Let's say a person prohibits something to himself with this konim vow, and then he benefits from it. Do we say he's going to be liable for this misappropriation or not? Do we say that he's made it like an offering, the chayav alav, and he's going to be responsible for it to bring an asha me'ila? The Ran doesn't say that. The Ran doesn't say the question is, do you have to pay back the value plus 1/5? The Ran says that the whole question is, do you have to bring the korban asha me'ila? That's how the Ran reads it, at least in this Tibur Maskell. So the Gemara says, Amarei. So when Rav asks this question from Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman responds, Tini Sua, let's bring you a proof from our Mishnah. That what do we learn? Makom shenoton asfar, tipo no actish. If somebody who you're not allowed to give benefit to returns a lost object to you, and you can't give him the schar, you can't give him payment for it because he's not allowed to benefit from you. So therefore, tipo ano actish. So the benefit that you get, you have to pay him, i.e. the schar batal, the amount he would have been paid otherwise if he had been working. That benefit goes to hektish. That goes to hektish. It goes to the temple. Lamemra, the Gemara says this, it means to be saying ki hektish. That it's like hektish. Ma hektish yesh bo mi'ila. Just like by a sacred thing, there is what's called trespassing, misappropriation. Afkunamos yesh bo mi'ila. So from our Mishnah, it implies that if you take this vow, and you misappropriate it, there's me'ila there, and you would have to bring the korban. So the Gemara says, well, let's not so fast with respect to reaching a conclusion here, because let's say this is actually machokas tanayim. This is actually a dispute, even though from our Mishnah it implies that there is me'ila. Let's look at the dispute from Kitanai, that there is a brisa which shows a dispute about this. What does the brisa say? So the brisa says, well, first of all, as an introduction to the brisa, we should say that there are two types of konamos. There's one where a person says this loaf of bread is prohibited upon me, and then there's another one where he says it's prohibited upon the entire world. So if somebody just says it's prohibited upon the whole world, that's like hektish. Hektish is prohibited upon the whole world. But if somebody says it's just prohibited upon me, then that's not like hektish, because hektish is not just on himself. Hektish is prohibited to everyone. So in that context, we'll read this brisa, konem kikar zu hektish. He says, I take a vow that this piece of cake is hektish, and then he goes ahead and eats it. Whether he eats it or his friend eats it, mal. And since this was a hektish type of vow, where he says prohibited upon everybody, whoever eats it is considered to be misappropriating temple funds. Since it's hektish, you could redeem it. But if he says kikar zu alai hektish, let's say he says this loaf of this piece of cake is upon me, is a hektish va'achla, and then he eats it, humal chaver mal. He's considered to be in violation, whereas his friend is not, because this is just a case of konem upon him. Therefore, it can't be redeemed. That's the position of Rav Meir. Chum say straight out, there's no me'ila by konem. Rav Meir says there is me'ila, depending upon the language you use. If you limit it to yourself, it's just upon you. But if you say it to everybody, it's me'ila on everybody. So Rav Meir seems to be saying in the position there is me'ila by konamos, and the Chum say there is not me'ila by konamos. And the Ran writes, the Ran says, with respect to halacha, we rule like Rabbi Meir that there is me'ilah, because the Rav Nachman because Rav Nachman answered Rava from our Mishnah that there is me'ilah. So that's that's the conclusion of the Ran, that there is me'ilah if you use this expression of konim, so you'd have to bring the korban. So Amalei Rav Acha Brei Rav Avi Rav Ashi, so Rav Acha Brei Rav Ashia, Rav Avi asked Rav Ashi, let's say he says Kikare Alecha. Let's say he says my piece of cake is prohibited upon you. And then so Reuven says my piece of bread is prohibited upon you. And then he gives it to him as a gift. After he says, my piece of bread is prohibited upon you, he gives it to him as a gift, like we had in the case above. Do we say, mima'al? Who's the one who has considered the misappropriation? Who's done the sin? Limal, no sin. Do we say the one who's giving the piece of cake is the one who has sinned? Hello, asirale. Limal. Hello, asirale. Let's Reuven says my piece of cake is prohibited upon you on Shimon, and then Reuven gives it to Shimon. Well, Reuven wasn't prohibited in it, so he's done nothing wrong. Limal Makab, how you want to say Shimon's done something wrong? He's the one who received it, and therefore he's benefited. So he's misappropriated. Yachal da Amar, he could say he had Teira ba'isi, Yisrael ba'isi. I only accepted it in the context that this is permitted. I didn't accept it thinking it was prohibited. So therefore, Amarle. So therefore, when Rav Avi asked this question to Rav Ashi responded, yeah, Shimon, the one who receives it, he's done misappropriation, but only once he has then given this piece of cake to somebody else. Because whoever takes out the money from Akdish Techuin, that's the one, and Kasavar Shachun, who because he thinks it's Chun, that's Moal, that's what's considered the misappropriation. Whoever takes out Hektish and brings it to Chulin, thinking it is Chulin, he did it b'shogeg, that's considered misappropriation, and Av Zemal. Also, in this case, this is going to be considered the misappropriation. Now we're going to go to the top of Lamed Hey Amud Beis, the next Mishnah. So it says the Mishnah says as follows. V'toreim es trumaso u'maserosef. So if a person is not allowed to benefit somebody, Reuven says to Shimon, you're not allowed to give me any benefit. Then Shimon's still going to be allowed to take a truma. The truma is the gift, the tithe, the separation to the Kohen. He's going to still be allowed to do it. U'maserosef, and he's also allowed to separate his meiser. He's allowed to do this l'dato. He's allowed to do this as long as he's aware. Meaning to say, the person who's not allowed to benefit has to be aware. We'll see what this means in the Gemara. So the Gemara is going to say that this refers to a case where he says whoever wants to could come and take a tithe. And so therefore that's the reason. But it's not an actual agency. The Gemara is going to discuss that. And so too, Ma'akr Valav, Kine Zavin, Zavos, Kine Yovados, Chatos, Vashamos. Also, he's allowed to bring for him a carbon in the following cases: Zav, Zava, Yovados, and Chatos and Ashamos. Gemara is going to say that the Chatos and the Ashamos, the sin and the guilt offerings, are referring to a Mitzorah here. So referring to the case of what's called Mechusar Kapara, that these four cases, Zav, Zava, Mitzorah, Yovados, the Zav and the Zav are the man and the woman, respectively, who have the flows from their body. The Yovados woman who's given birth. Mitzorah, the person who has the Tsaras disease, that even after they go through the purification process, they still can't enter the temple and eat the kachim until they bring the carbon. It's called mechusar kapara. But these these four cases, the person who's not allowed to benefit the other person, if he's a Kohen, he's allowed to bring these karbanos on his behalf. And next case is a mulamdo midrash halachas hagados. He's still allowed to teach the person midrash halacha and hamois agadot. Mikra, but he's not allowed to teach him biblical verses. Muhammad who has spanav has benos of mikra, but he's allowed to teach his sons and his daughters verses from the Torah. The Rambam and the Torah and all the manuscripts, they don't have the word daughters in there because they say you're not allowed to teach your daughters biblical verses. So why would he allow to be teaching his sons and his daughters? But the printed Mishnah has the form benosav in it, has the version of his daughters in it, but it's not in the Rambam. In Hilchos Nedarim, Parak Vav Halacha Zayin. The Chafetz Chaim writes in Hilchos Sota, Parak Gimel, that nowadays, where the Masorah has become weakened, the traditions become weakened, it's a great mitzvah to teach women Chumash, Nach, and the Musarim of Chazal, so that they should have. So we should basically be strengthening their faith. But this was in the medieval ages, in the medieval period. The Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch didn't think it was permitted, but then the Chafetz Chaim said it was permitted. So Ibayahu Gemara asked the following question, a powerful question. Hani Kahani, these Kohanim that serve in the temple. Fundamental question. Shulchan Didanaviu, Shulchan Deshmaya. Are these Kohanim, who do they represent? Are they represent our representatives? Do we get to walk in there and say to the Kohen, look him in the eye and say, you work for me? Or do we say they are shluchim of Shemaya, or are they agents of heaven? So who are the Kohanim working for? Gemara says, what do we care? Gemara says, the nafkamina is somebody who says to the Kohen, you can't give me any benefit. So, if we say the Kohanim are our agents, well, now he's benefiting him, the asur, and it's going to be prohibited. But if you say he's an agent of heaven, then we're going to say shari. We're going to say it's permitted because he's an agent of heaven. So therefore, he's not benefiting you because he's not your agent. So therefore, he can serve in the temple and bring a korban on your behalf. So the Gemara asks the Gemara says, "My what's ta'alacha tashma d'tanan?" Let's bring a proof from our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? That if a person is muder enough from somebody else, you're not allowed to benefit him. The Kohen's not allowed to benefit him. He's still allowed to bring the zav and the karbanos of the zava, the tzor yoedes. Now, iyam is, or actually in our Mishnah it says zav, zava yoedes, and the chatos and the hashamos. Now, iyam is shulchadidan kamahani. If you say he's so Gemara says, well, if you say he's our representative, how can he bring these karbanos? He's benefiting him. So isn't this a proof that he's shulchan d'shemaya? Isn't this a proof that he's an agent of heaven? Because he's not. Because how else could he benefit? The Gemara says, well, there's a big gaping hole in your theory. According to your theory, that he's a shliach of shemayim, that the Kohen is an agent of heaven. Then why does it limit it to these cases of mechusar kapara, where the zav and mitzvah and the yoedes? Why doesn't it just say all karbanos can be brought? It could just say let him bring karbanos. Why does it limit to the kinim, zav and zavos, and also the yoedes? So we say that the case of the mechusari kapara, where these kohan, where this person, the Baal, is missing kapara, he's missing this matir, this thing that will allow him to go into the temple and eat the kachim. That's different than a regular karban. Rabbi Yochanan, as Rabbi Yochanan taught, hakol tzrichen das, that if you want to bring a karban on behalf of somebody else, hakol tzrichen das, that you're always going to need the consent of the owner, or the knowledge of the owner, because they're coming, all the karbanos are coming as an atonement for a sin. But if you're bringing a mechusar kapara offering, they're not coming to atone for a sin. They're coming to be a matir. They're coming to allow their owners to eat the kachim, to enter into the temple, because these are not being an atonement for him like other karbanos. So therefore, you're allowed to bring them without the das of the owner. The Ran says, Chutz mi mechusari kapara. The Ran says, Zav v'zav mitzvah mitzoras v'yoledes. The kul ksiv Toras. It says the word Toras. V'karu mechusari kapara mishum shasur l'kani yisrael mikdash. We call them mechusari kapara because they're not allowed to enter into the temple, from the kachim, until they bring their kapara son. Bahani, and these four, kimin de'ein karbanan bal chapara, since the offering is not coming as an atonement, ein tzrichem das. We don't need their consent. We don't need their knowledge. But anytime the offering is coming to atone for somebody's sin, then indeed ein echanam tzrichem das. Then we would need knowledge. So therefore, so that's why our Mishnah is saying mechusari kapara, because that's not an agent of you. So it proves the opposite. It proves that they are shlichut didan. These kohanim are our agents, and just in this case, this is not our agency because this is a matir to bring the mechusari kapara offerings. Shari adam kol shlichut das chutz mechusari kapara, and back to the Gemara. Shari adam may be karban al bana val banos v'akatanim, because Rabbi Yochanan brings a proof, because we know a person can bring a sacrifice for his minor children. And what's the source for the idea that he can bring a sacrifice for his minor children? Because it says about a zav, Zos Toras Hazav. This is the law of Hazav. That Zos Toras Hazav, this is the law of Hazav. That by Hazav, the Torah writes the word Toras, and it's coming to include Ben Gadol, Ben Katan. It's coming to include a zav who's an adult or a minor, and obviously a minor is not a bar das to bring an offering. So the father brings it on his behalf. And so just like he's allowed to bring it before his minor who has no das, so too he's able to bring it for his friend, even without his consent when it comes to a zav. So the Gemara says, let's challenge Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that the word Toras comes to include even the ketanim. What about the fact that in the verse it says Zos Torah Sayoedes? This is the Torah of the Yoedes. So if you're saying that the word Torah is including a minor, well, that doesn't make sense because you can't have a woman who gives birth who's a minor. That's an impossibility. It's a fundamental principle. It says Bein Ketana Ubein Gedoa. And now you want to say that the word Torah also comes to include a minor. Ketana Basli, that can a minor girl give birth? We know that she can't. Vatani Rav Bibi Kamed Rav Nachman. This appears 4 times in Shas. Shalosh Nashim Mishamtros B'moch. 3 women use contraception. Is a machokas rishonim? Does it mean that they're allowed to, or they must use contraception because it's dangerous? And who are these women? Ketana, a minor girl, Mubarak, Sumenika. A minor girl, a pregnant woman, and a nursing woman. They use contraception because we don't want them to become pregnant. Because we're worried that the minor girl becomes pregnant, she's going to die. So we see from here a fundamental principle that Ketana cannot give birth. A minor girl cannot give birth. So how can we say that the word Torah is including a Ketana when it comes to the offering of a Yoedes when the Ketana can't give birth in the first place? Gemara says, no. When it says Yoedes when it says Torah by the Yoedes, it means Zos Torah Sa Yoedes bein Pikechas bein Shota. It's not meant to include a minor. It's coming to include whether she's of sound mind or not. Shkein Adam may be carbon al Ishto Shota. A person is allowed to bring a carbon for his wife even if she's not of sound mind. That's Kedivri Rabbi Yehuda. This is consistent with the position of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda taught. And Rabbi Yehuda taught the following: Omer Adam, the Tanya Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Adam may be carbon asher al ishto chol karbana shachayev. A person is allowed to bring a sacrifice on behalf of his wife, even if she's poor. She is poor because she technically, let's say, doesn't have any assets, but he's wealthy. He can bring the offering on behalf of her, the chol karbanos shechayevas, and all the offerings that she's obligated to. Shekach kosevra. Because that's what he writes to her. Because he writes to her in the Ksuva, I'm obligated to bring all your obligations. And so we see from here, we're saying that the word Zos Toras is coming to include a woman who's not of sound mind. That the husband can bring her offering even though she doesn't have das. And so therefore, in the previous verse, the word Torah is coming to include a minor. And that's teaching us, when it comes to Mechusar Kippurim, we're able to say that Kohanim can bring it without the das. But in general, in general, we haven't answered the question whether or not the Kohanim are the Shluchot Didan, or they're our agents, or they're the agents of Hashem. And so that we're going to leave for tomorrow's daf to take up that question. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them at this point.